Hi everyone, welcome to this video. It's been a couple of days since I've done an update on COVID-19, and the reason is because I was actually going to make a video about the United States and Canada, and I spent some time working on the data, but it turns out that these are actually very difficult countries to analyze in terms of the COVID-19 epidemic. The main reason is because these are federal countries, so they have provinces or states, and the situation is very different in very different parts of the country. So I'm going to leave that for a couple more days until I'm quite sure that what I'm doing makes sense before I come back to United States and Canada. As you can see, United States has now 500,000 cases. They are currently passing Italy as the country with the largest number of casualties. Has been more than 2,000 deaths just today. So instead, I'm going to look at France and Germany and see how they are doing in the COVID-19 crisis. Now, these countries are both European countries. They're very close together, but there's actually some profound differences between those two countries, and so let's take a look at how that is represented in the data. Now, in the number of cases, we can see they're about the same, a little over 120,000 reported cases of COVID-19, but whereas there's only been about about less than 3,000 deaths in Germany, there's been over 13,000 deaths in France, so there's a very big difference there, and so we can kind of speculate on why this is the case and how they're dealing with the situation. So let's start with Germany. I'll start with Germany first. Now, Germany actually is also a federal country, but it seems that the coronavirus is spread fairly evenly throughout the country, so I think we can make an analysis as a single country, but I am going to say that I am a lot less certain about my conclusions than I am about other countries. It is possible that my numbers are overestimating the actual future situation, but let's take a look at what we find. So in Germany, currently, as I said, a little under 3,000 cases. My projection, based on the simulations of my model, leads to 34,000 deaths in the future. However, there is quite a range on these numbers, and as I said, it is because I'm actually not quite sure what the situation really is. The model tends to overestimate the future number of deaths, and I'm happy to say that I've looked at the data of Italy, Spain and Iran after I made those videos. In all three cases, the number of newly reported deaths is less than what my model predicted. And I mentioned that when I talked about Italy, that I had seen that in China my model was overestimating the long-term number of deaths, and that I was hoping that I would see the same thing with other countries, and indeed that is seems to be the case, at least for a couple of days that we have extra data. So you can ignore the upper limit as not realistic at all. I think we can see the base case here, the projected case is probably a more realistic upper limit to the number of deaths that can be expected in Germany, with a lower limit of about 10,000–11,000. So the projection, an estimation of how many lives have been saved by the social distancing measures, the non-pharmaceutical interventions in Germany, is on the order of 12,000. In terms of basic reproduction rates, I estimate this number to be about 3.7 before intervention, which is pretty average. And after intervention, I estimate this to be about 0.9. So that is a 75% effectiveness of the intervention, but this is dangerously close to 1. Now, I've noticed that federal countries systematically seem to have a larger number when I do my analysis with my model, and that is mainly due to heterogeneity. You have countries where things start early but they start slowly. That's what I've seen in both the US and Canada as well, and I can talk about that in a couple of days. For instance, the West Coast, you see, they had the earliest cases, but they've been growing fairly slowly. And then the East Coast came later, but in the East Coast, the virus is spreading more rapidly. And so overall, you see kind of an acceleration, and it's as if the measures that they're taking are not working. They're actually making things worse, but that's not the case. It's because of the difference between different states, different provinces, different lander in a particular country, that the measures seem less effective than they really are. And I think the same thing is happening in Germany. So if that is true, then at least they're below 1, and probably this is an overestimate. So probably we can be quite sure that Germany is on the right track and they are going to beat the virus. It just might take a while, and in the meantime the number of deaths might run up fairly high. So in terms of cases, there currently is, we can update that to about 120,000 reported cases. My estimation is that there are actually more than 600,000 cases, and I estimate that in the next year or so, there will be a total of about 2 million people who will be infected with the coronavirus. To look at the charts, this is what we have now. This is what my model is projecting. So it predicts that the increase is going to continue for a fairly long time. This is the number of active cases. What's interesting here is that the reported number of cases runs ahead of the simulations. And what that means is, in my simulations here, I assume that a case gets reported after people have had symptoms for about 5 days. So clearly in Germany, people have been reporting cases before they were sick for 5 days, which is actually a good thing. It allows them to be more proactive. So I think this is good news. I also estimate that 1 in 2.6 cases has been reported, which is actually a very good ratio. That means that about 40% of the cases are known, at least by the time they get a week of symptoms. So I think that's all good news. And here, this is a reason why I think my model is overestimating the actual future cases. Germany is already seeing a peak in the number of active cases, whereas my model predicts that the peak will be somewhere in May. So hopefully that can be confirmed in the next couple of days, that the number of cases is declining. That means that the measures are actually much more effective than what my model is predicting. So that's the situation in Germany. I'd say 34,000 probably overestimated, 10,000 as a lower limit. So probably we're going to be somewhere in between there for the actual situation. And in the next couple of weeks, we'll get a much better sense of which way Germany is going. So let's compare that with France. As I said, there's quite a bit of difference between Germany and France. France, people are generally quite organized and quite disciplined, and as a result, the government has not seen the need to have a very draconian lockdown, because they figure that if they tell their people just figure if we tell people what to do, they will just do that, and you don't really need to follow up so closely. And France is a very different culture. Rules are generally considered more as suggestions, really. Quality of life is what people really value the most. And but on the other hand, you have a government that realizes that this is the French way of life. So they realize if there is a real emergency situation, they have to take very draconian measures to make sure that people are following these instructions. And that's, I think, what we're seeing in France. I've spent many holidays in France. I've lived a year in Germany, so I know both countries very well, and that's where I kind of get my impressions. So let's take a look. Where is France going? I'm actually projecting as my base case that in the long run, the number of cases in France will be roughly the same as the number of cases in Germany, surprising as it may sound, because if we go back to the data, even today there's still almost 1,000 of new deaths in France. So it seems as if the social distancing measures are not working. They've been in a lockdown for several weeks and they still have about 1,000 deaths per day. Now my model actually shows that things are quite different than what they appear. So let's see, my upper limit and lower limit are actually quite close together. It seems that my model is much more accurate in calculating what's happening in France than in Germany. And I'll get to the reason why in a minute. In terms of how many lives saved, my estimation is about 26,000. So the social distancing measures have clearly worked already. Things would have been a lot worse if these measures had not been taken. Remember, there were already 800 deaths when France had a national lockdown. That is a lot more than even Italy, probably 2 or 3 times as high as Italy when they had a national lockdown. And so it is no surprise that there's still a lot of deaths in France happening because, relatively speaking, they reacted very late. Okay, so in terms of basic reproduction rate, before intervention, this was about 3.2, a little less than Germany, which actually surprised me. I expected it to be higher than Germany. After intervention, the model indicates that the number is as low as 0.4. In other words, the interventions have been about 87% effective. That's the highest effectiveness I've seen other than in China. Now that, in a sense, is not a surprise because I think that France has done the most extreme lockdown other than China. China, I saw an effectiveness of about 91%. The French have been very strict on this. People are not allowed to go out unless they have a written form that indicates where they're going and why. And people can be arrested for not having that. So there's very, very strict rules in France about this lockdown. I think that's what is really working. It seems otherwise because they still have about 1,000 deaths per day, but that is because there were already so many cases when the lockdown started. In terms of cases, what are we seeing in France? Well, as I said, about 120,000 reported. According to my model, there is an estimated 2 million people who carry the virus right now, but that number is actually not going to increase very much anymore because the R0 is so small. So if my projections are correct, in the next couple of months, the virus is essentially going to die out very quickly. Here is the number of cases predicted, modeled and observed. This is the number of active cases. According to the model, we should be right at the peak right now. So let's say to the French people, hang in there. The next couple of days, things are going to peak and then things are going to get better. For France, my model indicates that the current number of seriously sick people is on the order of 70,000 and is going to peak around that value. So that is the situation in France and Germany, even though the number of deaths is still very different right now. It seems that France, with the more extreme lockdown measures than Germany, is actually pushing harder to turn things around. We haven't seen the effects of that turnaround yet. It takes about a month to really see the effect of turning things around, but things seem to be on the right track in France. They are also on the right track in Germany. It's just a little less obvious. And as I mentioned, the fact that Germany is a federal country with local differences between the lander could explain why it's so hard to make predictions. So I hope you find the information in this video useful. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I hope to see you again one of the next few days with more information about the coronavirus.